Hey everybody, welcome to Unbreakable Radio. I'm super excited to have James Thayer on the podcast today. James and I got introduced to each other, I think, just through social media, through Instagram, and it's been really cool to find another coach here in Kansas. He's located in Topeka. He works for Washburn University, directing student life and recreation center like trainers and kind of all of the health and personal wellness and fitness employees at the rec center at Washburn. And he's head honcho in Prescript, so he's it's been cool to watch him accelerate into a role there where he's helping with intensives, doing some admin, and taking over some of the laboratories for their continuing education. So I probably super butchered that, so James, I'll let you make everything accurate. But it's super cool to have you today, and I really appreciate you taking your time to spend time with us.
Yeah, and Elise, I appreciate you having me on. Like you mentioned, it's always great to connect with people in Kansas. And so, yeah, just to kind of expand upon some of like the, I guess, titles. So at Washburn, Assistant Director of Fitness and Wellness. So I oversee personal trainers, group fitness instructors, our fitness loft staff, and any of the services and programs that we offer through the facility. And that's to students, faculty, and staff, and anybody that has an SRWC membership. And then at Prescript, it's kind of it's built a little bit over the years. So initially just started with them, started with the PSL1 class like almost 3 years ago, maybe. Jumped in on the first one of that, just liked the information, kind of stayed involved, stayed connected with some of the guys. And then was offered to start doing some of the labs. And so with PSL1 originally, there were several labs. With PSL1, it's a weekly lecture, and there's a couple offered, but it's week by week, 16-week course. And so each week there's now 4 labs that are offered for people to come in and just kind of Q&A and ask questions to try to digest and disseminate the information that they learned the week before. And I think something that Prescript has done really well with these is focus that information on being able to put it into application. And so putting context to it, being able to use real case studies of coaches and clients, or trainers bringing in coaching situations, their clients, just asking general questions, whether it's their own training, whether it's their client's training, but really being able to add that context so they can directly apply, so they see the information, or they're able to use the information from the lecture directly into that same week or moving forward into their practice. So it's not just, we've all been through a CPT where some of the information we keep, some of it doesn't. I think there is validity to a foundational certification, but if you don't have that experience and you're not training, sometimes that information and context can get lost. So I think with the labs, we've been able to kind of capture a unique opportunity of assisting with application to better connect the material. So I've been doing that for quite a while, and then recently have been working a bit more on the administrative side, helping with some CEU credentials, looking at getting our current 2-day workshops, the Prescript intensives. We have one in October in Toronto and one in January in San Jose, as well as working towards getting PSL1 certified for CEU credits. The reason we moved towards this, we were looking at a way to kind of give a value back to any of the coaches and trainers and clinicians that sign up for it. And we identified this as a way that most of them have that foundational certification, whether it's through organizations like NSCA or NASM or multiple. And so looking at a way of how by coming into the Prescript family, how they can still, how it's not just focused, or it's not just Prescript that they're getting, but now there's that buy-in value that they get the continued education as well with those organizations.
And it seems like the application, I know that is, weightlifting exists in the real world, right? Like our time with our clients exists in the real world, and the byproduct of training is physically manifest. And so I think that's something that's been super cool to observe just in, I mean, I think watching your training videos and then watching other Prescript coaches, like the other coaches that I've seen from kind of come out of that program, it seems like there's such a strong grasp, like almost immediately, on how to see what's going on with a client or see what's going on like in a joint or in a structure and a movement, and to like really coach that and directly apply that knowledge. And that's something that was really, I think, already stand out to me. And so that's been, I think, a really big draw for myself in being more interested in Prescript and in wanting to take one of the courses as well. What do you think as far as helping people apply, because you do the Prescript certification remotely, correct? Like this is,
Mhm.
it's primarily over webcam. How do you teach people how to apply things, and how do you filter information? How do you filter what people need and what people don't when you're hosting those labs?
Yeah, so the labs I think are very, very helpful in answering those questions and making it a environment where like people feel like they can come and they're talking to other coaches, and it's, it's not setting in a conference hall of 50 to 100 people and like you're the person in the back having to like raise your hand at the end of it and like, God, I hope this isn't a dumb question. That it's a bit more private and exclusive to people in PSL courses, and it's actually expanded to anybody that's taken the courses, no matter if it's PSL1, if it's skill acquisition that registration is open for, that they have the ability to go to these and ask these questions, and again, to try to disseminate it to apply it. But I think it's kind of twofold. So Jordan Shallow and Jordan Genta, they're the owners of Prescript. I think they've done a very, very good job in the verbiage that they use that makes it very practical and understandable. They teach in multiple mediums, not just a lecture. They use PowerPoint with visuals, but if you've been in some of Shallow's, like he'll go and get out the Mac whiteboard and just like start drawing it up, and so like finding multiple ways that people learn, I think that's a huge benefit to it. But also something they speak to is it's not creating a system, it's a systems way of thinking. Because I think the issue sometimes with systems is like it's very, very good to have a standard that you can apply across all levels and all people.
Sure.
With that, sometimes you have to lower that bar to meet the lowest variable, or to meet people of no experience, no education in fitness and exercise to the highest level. Sometimes with that, setting that bar, setting that standard so low, it's too remedial for people that have more experience and more knowledge, and it can't dive very deep for the farther end of the spectrum, because you just have to introduce the concept. So one thing that they speak to that resonated with me pretty early was it's not a system, it's a systems way of thinking. And so through that, it's not here's the gold standard that you have to apply. It's think about it like this, and if you go off of this principle, if you go off of this thought process, you can apply it to any situation. So it's more so through the focus of application, through that way of thinking of, well, if I know this muscle does this, okay, whenever I'm seeing this happen, okay, I know here's the issue, or like here's at least where to look. It's a starting point approach that I think resonates with quite a few people, and just it's practical and it makes sense. So I think that's a huge way how they've been able to or I guess Prescript's been able to like manifest that application into practice through just a hour lab or an hour lecture, is giving the information, being able to digest it over a week, but also having those labs available that they can go and directly ask questions and get feedback, not just from myself or the Prescript coaches, but try to crowdsource. Like again, it's not just one of the lab coaches talking for an hour. There's a lot of crossover and conversation and people pulling from their different experiences, their different backgrounds, and their different professions to add context. And so somebody comes into the lab with a question and might hear 5 different sides of an answer. And so through that, they're able to kind of filter it and pull out what they need to be able to best apply it to their client and their training practice.
Very cool. I think so much of what you said resonated with me, in particular, kind of this idea of getting 5 sides of an answer. One thing I think that when you start out as a coach, and I don't know if you experienced this, but I think this is something that I experienced, is when you start training people, there's a lot of like, there's the camps of, here is my model and this is the correct way to do everything. And like you had mentioned, like models don't fit everybody, they're imperfect. And when you inherently stick to one exclusive system, you miss out on complexity by being reductionist, by creating a frame that X amount of people have to fit into. And I think it's really hard and confusing at first, quite frankly, to take the information that you're learning as you advance and to assimilate that information and to say like, okay, maybe there's not a hard right answer. Maybe there's 3 answers that live in the gray space. And then I have to be able to understand this context through exposure to it to know what method to apply or to know how to progress someone or how to deal with this kind of problem solving. And so I think it's really cool that you teach people, it's like thinking about thinking, where you teach people how to problem solve more than giving them the answer. Because ultimately, good coaches and good clinicians should be good problem solvers, not just a lexicon of answers to questions that have already been asked.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I like how you stated it of like it's problem solvers. And if we can approach it like that, I think like that's why I've been very fortunate in my fitness development or working as a professional that at times, well, through my professional career, I've never worked under somebody with a fitness background.
Sure.
So with that, a lot of it has been having to go out, having to search and find answers and get that development for myself and kind of map out my own path and my own road through that. It's not to say in college, like in my undergrad and graduate degree, I wasn't pulling information and taking information from the classroom. And I think also I just had a unique experience where the degree I was in did very, very, did a good job of exposing us to a lot of mediums, like having a training client at the city rec, of going to different group fitness classes to get exposure, doing lunch and learns for businesses in the community, doing health fairs and different things like that. But it just provided that experience where like you're starting to see these different pathways that you can take. And I think that helped as far as the like me exploring into different mediums and not getting caught into one system. I found things that resonated with me, but then I also looked at, okay, when doesn't this work? And I never really, honestly, Prescript's probably the first organization that I've done the majority of their certifications, and it probably dove deeper into than any other organization I've been with, because I've always tried to get exposure to some different ones, like ACSM in college, NSCA conferences, was doing a master trainer is ACE, doing their workshops, going to like Idea World, going to different NERSA, that's the campus rec organization, going to different regional and regional and statewide and the countrywide conferences, and just getting a lot of exposure to different organizations, to different ways of training, to different professionals. That's one thing I also try to be very good at, is whenever I went to conferences or workshops or anything, it's actually participating. Like I know it sounds very, very simple, but for anybody in the field, like you can go very far if you do 2 very simple things: show up and talk to people.
Yeah.
Like just through that, like that's how me and Jordan Shallow first met. I went to a free conference, or I guess a free seminar that he did over shoulders, hips, and spine at Destination Dallas whenever I lived in Texas, and went there, probably waited an hour, hour and a half at the back of the line till everybody got through, and then like met him, just told him I appreciated him offering it, and we ended up talking for like an hour or so after that. And um, so yeah, just, and that only happened by showing up and like being willing to engage and talk, and not just sitting in the corner and leaving and expecting information just in itself to be revolutionary. It's, at the end of the day, it's just words, and words only matter whenever you have the ability to apply them. So looking to like, how can I best apply these words that I just learned?
I think, yes, that's so spot on, and I think it's so easy now with social media and the internet and things like that for us to just become like empty vessels for consuming information, that where we don't apply it, or where we assign the value of information as consumption, that the consumption of information is the value. And I think that, like you said, they are just words, and that information and knowledge are not, they're not the same thing, and that knowledge is all of that information and taken and brought into the real world. And I think it's a great reminder to all of us to actually participate and actually engage with these things. And I'll joke with training, it's like, I'd rather have somebody that knows like whatever, this much, right? That uses everything that they know, than somebody that knows, X grandiose amount, but that uses such a small percentage, they're using less than the person that knows less. And so I think that, yeah, there's a real balance. And I think it's something in our industry that we have to really strive for, to balance consuming knowledge and applying knowledge, and then like participating with the real people around us. And I think that's kind of a lost value set to some degree, of like, I'm going to stay after the conference and I'm just going to thank the person that presented, because it's like what you should do, and I think also the words component, that's something to me that's always stood out about your presence online, is that, seems like you're always applying, you're always training, and you have a really stable, it appears that you have a very stable, certain coaching practice for yourself in your own training, and that you make, decisive movements, decisive exercises, and that you take those to their fullest extent. And I think something, your captions will always be, some of them are like, pretty verbose, right? Like they're long. And I think like, yeah, I'll just be on there and I'll read, it'll be like you doing hip airplanes with like the safety squat bar or something. And there'll be this caption about movement and kinetics, but it also feels like I'm reading like literature or something. And so I think that's something that you tie in really well. Kind of along some of those lines, like, it's very apparent that you think very deeply about movement, and that you think very deeply about movement as a continuum. I know some time ago it may have been for NERSA that you presented the spider webs of progression model. You had a presentation. Can you talk more about that? Because that was like fucking mind blowing. That was like such a cool way to think about progressing exercise.
Yeah, so I'll kind of hit on a couple points because you covered a lot there. Yeah, so anybody that goes on my Instagram and reads the captions, sometimes it's just yelling words at the internet or myself. Shout out to Lou Baum's Body on Instagram, who I think he has articulated my writing style better than I could have, of like barbell poetry.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's so accurate. It feels exactly like that. I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah, I think part of that is just like the literature background that I have, that like, I don't know, I write in a way that I think in like more of like through literature, because I think that was just a big focus for me growing up, and sometimes it's just a weird writing style, but I stick with it. So yeah, to kind of break down a couple points with that. With my training, like I have the ability to stay consistent. Since I've got to Topeka, I was very, very fortunate to find the gym that I train out of, Strength Guild, and so the majority of my videos are from that. It looks like a weird old powerlifting warehouse. It is.
Super cool.
And so the owner of that, Phil, he does the programming for all the members. It's kind of included in it. And so with that, kind of looking at that opportunity of this is somebody that has been in the space for 15 plus years and has worked around and with and for like some of the top names in the industry and like just this like hidden gem in Kansas. So for that, like started looking at having him programming my strength days, and what that's really allowed is like I've been able to switch off my mind a little bit on like, okay, I need to make this whole program for myself, because as a coach, you probably know that like the hardest person to program for is yourself.
Yeah,
Because you have to run through all the variables and there's never enough days, there's never enough time, you want to accomplish too many things. And so having him program my strength days has been very, very beneficial, because then it frees up other days where I can explore a little bit more. I can test out some different things. I can look at some of the like more unique exercises that I might do that aren't covered in the strength day, where it's the focus for those aren't strength. So I already have a component that I don't necessarily focus on. And a lot of times what that's going to look at is like more unilateral training, more something that might have a like higher skill or might need more stability. And then with those exercises, looking at how to progress it and how to regress it. Because if I think a lot of times, and this will kind of go into the spider webs, don't worry, I'll get there.
I'm enjoying listening. I'm just listening.
But so I also teach a PT course, a personal trainer in-house course at Washburn University. And with these trainers, they're very, very green trainers coming in that train themselves and maybe trained a friend, but have never done it professionally. And so with that, it's, it's looking at, it's trying to develop a thought process to approach exercise. And so something with that I've taught through that class and that I've spoke to a little bit is thinking about movement along a spectrum. So a lot of times I've found that through whatever your training history is or training style is, whatever your background and knowledge is, whatever your experience is, sometimes trainers and coaches can get very stuck in only seeing an exercise through its isolation and like not really understanding, like in seeing that isolated state, they're not able to modify or adjust it. So whenever something goes wrong or they run out of their ability to progress, well, if something goes wrong, they have an inability to regress it and better understand why pain is showing up or why there's a movement efficiency, or they are so dependent on load or adding intensity as their progression that they hit that ceiling really quick. And then once they've gotten to that point, where else can you go but down? So trying to contextualize that a little bit, that exercise doesn't operate in isolation. It operates along a continuum because there's shared movement patterns across multiple exercises. So if we look at like a conventional deadlift, all that is a progressed version of a RDL, and all that is a progressed version of a hip hinge. And so starting to teach people like these connecting points along the spectrum can give them a better understanding of like how to flow along the spectrum and how to modify or how to progress and regress exercise, because they're not so fixated on the movement or on the exercise itself, but more so the mechanics that go into the movement give them a greater ability to like start flowing and playing with how we program or how we look at exercise. And so that thought process of movement spectrum kind of came from the presentation I did on spider webs of progression. And so the tenets of spider webs of progression, it kind of thought about exercise as a stressor, essentially, is kind of the starting point where like a lot of people think of exercise, and most of the time they're going to associate the benefits that come with exercise. And like there's a lot of benefits that come with exercise, but we also have to be mindful of that those benefits only turn into benefits through the recovery process. And so And so having the conversation around like exercise is stress. We need to understand that, and stress accumulates. And there's a whole long conversation of like outside stressors and just the exercise and just the workout, but this fed into the thought process of spider webs of progression, where we're looking at stress accumulation through the week and how a spider builds its webs. It starts at the anchor point. So it starts kind of around the outside and then builds down. And so if we're thinking about the anchor points or the web in between, that there is a lesser density on the outskirts of the web as we build down to the medium. And so whenever we're building down to the medium, it's focused on that this can take the most blunt or the most force. So if a fly is going into the web, if it hits dead center, it's not getting out. If it's able to hit one of the far end strains, it might be able to work off of it. It might be able to fly through it depending on its size. But through that middle where we built down, we built up a lot of webbing, or we built up a lot of security in our ability to like mobilize to that state, to stabilize, and to like build strength. That is what that center point is. It's going to focus around our primary exercise, but it's everything that comes before that building down to it. So if we look at our warm-ups, our correctives, our preparation, whatever verbiage people like to use for it, but that should all be building to that primary exercise, and everything we're doing should prepare us for that, because that's going to occur the most stress, but that can also take the most density if done correctly, because we built our web to support that. And so it can be looked at through a single workout or through the stress of the day, that it's our primaries or our most stressful exercises. And with this web, it's all connected through the multiple anchor points. So knowing that like in that stressor, it's a stressor that, hey, this one workout carries over to the next one. Like very, very easy example for people listening. If we think about, okay, if you bench press on day one and then day two you go and squat and your elbow hurts, that's connected. Like there's some things that we need to address with external rotation potentially, and long term, like we need to look at like either the preparation of both days to alleviate that shoulder pain and address that lack of external rotation, or the disassociation of the shoulder going into external rotation with the ribs, so we're not creating a rib flare to try to create that, exactly, to try to create that greater range of motion. And so it's just looking at like these layer on top of each other. And so through that layering, we need to be mindful of that we've created enough density to withstand the stress that is going to go into the middle.
I think the other fascinating thing to me about that model, like it's so useful. Big truck driving by. It's so useful as far as like thinking about it in a day or thinking about it in a training week. But it seems to me like you could even zoom that out farther and think about it in terms of like the global structure of your program over like a multiple week, all the way from microcycle to macrocycle. Like you can kind of consider the spider web at each point. And what I really appreciate about the mindset approach to it is it's maybe robustness based, or there's a focus on generating resiliency over time. And I think that a lot of the times when we program, especially for novices, like novices at programming, or like those kind of green trainers that are just learning how to do that, we can get so focused on like an end game result, which isn't necessarily bad, right? It's like, I'm going to train up to a powerlifting meet and these are the numbers I'd like to hit or whatever. Like being results oriented is wonderful. But I think that especially for new folks, like you said, right, it's like we maybe rely on load, adding load or adding intensity is like our only method of progression, and then we run out of room. And I just really appreciate this idea of like, okay, we're focusing on different qualities and we're building all of these different qualities towards a more robust system so that we can tolerate doing the high output work. I just think that's really cool, and seems so sustainable and so analytical, but also so flexible at the same time.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head that it can be seen through like a workout or like the micro cycle of it, but when used appropriately, and this is going to be based on the trainer or the coach and their understanding, it's flexible in application to the person applying it based on how they can understand it or how they can program around it, that that macro cycle should be the long-term purpose of what we're looking at creating. But if you need to start at a smaller point, like it has the flexibility to be applied that way. It's a saying I use kind of for workouts, but it applies to this is walk when you must, sprint when you can. And so it's looking at the context of, if based on somebody's experience, based on their knowledge, if they need to walk and keep it to a microcycle and just start learning the skill of viewing this over, viewing the stress that's going to accumulate from the workout in the day, there's flexibility in that. In the week, it can expand and still have that flexibility, but then eventually expanding to a macro cycle and looking at long-term progression and success. Like you as a trainer, you know that like the best workout is the one that somebody consistently does and sees progression on, like plain and simple. And so if we can find ways of approaching training for longevity, ultimately, we're going to see those benefits. And that's longevity in context of like, whenever there is a performance-based goal, it is to the inverse of health. Like you're not chasing a performance-based goal to be healthy. You're chasing a performance-based goal to perform. But with that, there is that fluctuation of, okay, this is where we're going to prioritize and emphasize our performance, and then afterwards we're going to look a little bit more at health, a little bit more at longevity, and kind of use more, making it more sustainable of like rolling hills instead of peaks and valleys where, okay, everything goes by the wayside for performance and your whole life goes to trash, and then like now we're in that valley to the extreme point and looking at, hey, where can we find a little bit more balance to this approach, still knowing that like it's not going to be health and performance going up at the same time, but like how can we buffer the in between a little bit better than just having a singular focus where like we've gotten to the peak of it and again everything fell by the wayside, and then going to the valley where we lose all the progression we made going up to the peak.
Yeah, you're shrinking the distance in, you know, if it's like a wave signal, right? It's like you're shrinking the depth of the wave a little bit as a way to maintain balance by a balance of imbalances, oscillation, as opposed to that like kind of harsh roller coaster. And I think that that's like anybody that's chased a performance goal or anybody that's trained somebody really chasing a performance goal knows that feeling where you're like, wow, I'm not my healthiest right now, but I'm performing. And I think if we push that too far, it's like on the one hand, I think, especially in strength sports, I think there's some valorization of doing things that really sacrifice your health. And I think that dialing the volume down on that a little bit so that we do have that longevity and sustainability is really important. It sounds like a lot of the work that you're doing focuses on being a coach's coach or an educator. Do you do any one-on-one coaching with people yourself?
I do a little bit of one-on-one coaching. Where I'm at now with in the university with Prescript, with courses and things like that, pretty limited on time to be able to give like the amount of time and energy into like a ton of one-on-one coaching. So yeah, I do have it, but it's very, very limited. And just because where I've gotten in my career, like you're exactly right. Like where my preference is coaching coaches, training trainers, and like getting into groups and having these discussions and conversations and thinking about not just the program side of it, but like how we apply this to across multiple mediums or like multiple clients, and how we make our training approach adaptable to them. So yeah, I've the last several years been leaning a lot harder into the education side towards professionals.
How has that shift been for you? I mean, it seems like clearly you're tremendously successful, but I think that for me, it would be a paradigm shift. Like, as somebody who spends most of my professional time working with people one on one, was that like a scary transition to make, or did it feel really natural? Like, kind of, how did you find yourself in this position, and where do you see yourself kind of moving forward?
Yeah, so a little bit of it, it was just kind of a natural progression in in my undergrad to graduate transition, because I worked at the student rec. Like, that's kind of where I found my career path, was in undergrad, working at the university, and getting offered a GA-ship that kept me in the field, because I was like, oh, somebody wants to pay for college, cool, I'll go that route. um, but yeah, I think some of it came with that transition of undergrad to graduate, because I was in undergrad, I was doing group fitness classes, I was working in facilities, I was personal training, and then um, took over the administrative side of the fitness and aquatic department in graduate school. And so with that, just in itself, it limited my ability to just work one-on-one with clients. I still kept some because I still needed to learn a lot, and I needed a lot of practice. Luckily, I kept clients because it created one of the best training experiences I had with a client, was somebody that challenged my way of training. Because in the rec center, as you know, like the majority of the people are going to be students that you're training. You might get some faculty and staff, but by and large it's students. And honestly, it's not too hard to train students. Like, you can throw a lot at them, you have a lot of options, and you don't have many restrictions. You can do that incorrectly and improperly, absolutely, but you have a lot more options. And so one of my last clients at Emporia State, it was a elder gentleman who was hearing impaired, visually impaired, had previously had a stroke, had paralysis on his left leg, and had some herniated discs in his vertebra. So yeah, that face, that's the exact face I had as well. And he was very, very highly respected at the university. He might or might not have the athletic training building named after him. So yeah. So kind of get this curveball of like, hey, can you train him? And then we, start looking at all this, and I was like, oh, I am underprepared for this. But kind of what I talk to client or trainers about, especially younger trainers, is you're never this is the misconception of getting that certification, that it prepares you for everything. It doesn't. How I talk about the CPT is the foundation, and me as an employer, it sets a baseline expectation of what your knowledge should be. And that's how I've kind of always treated it. And so in that, I wasn't necessarily prepared for it, but by the sessions I was, because I was doing research, I was getting feedback from the client, seeing, hey, how does this feel? Is this okay? I was talking to his physical therapist, seeing what they were doing, what his contraindications were, what his limitations. So I had to be on point to be able to train a client like that. But it's knowing that, like, hey, this certification doesn't prepare you for everything, and the expectation isn't that you need to know everything. I think that's where we can get into like consumption over application, is just trying to learn everything and never actually doing it. But knowing with that like, hey, just take your clients one by one, like be the best trainer that you can. You need to put the time and energy into that, into like researching what they're presenting with, meeting them at their limitations, and like working within the ranges that they can. It doesn't have to be an expectation of, hey, if like, it doesn't have to be an expectation with that client, like, I'm not putting a barbell on his back and teaching him to squat. Like we're looking at like, hey, let's make sure we're reinforcing appropriate mechanics of getting up and out of a chair.
Yeah.
Like, that's going to
Quality of
benefit.
life.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to correlate or translate over to like his lifestyle, and that in itself of teaching those appropriate mechanics that relate back to daily life, those are just going to be reinforced in training and continue to build and pay dividends. Um, but yeah, so with that, that client really challenged me, and I think that was a huge step for me in looking to expand where I'm pulling knowledge from, and because I couldn't just depend on, well, I learned this in class. Like I
Right.
had to go outside of the classroom and had to look at multiple resources. So I think that was a huge step. But also in that transition from undergrad to grad, um, just in itself, it lessened my ability to train clients one-on-one and redirected my focus to preparing the trainers to now train trainers. And so started taking over taking over staff training, that I was teaching them, okay, like here's all the paperwork we do, here's the step-by-step process of taking in clients, of like here's starting points to training. And through my graduate degree, that was the big focus, and the turning point for that is it was starting to train trainers, starting to train instructors and coaches, and meeting them at where they were in their experience and their understanding. I had some trainers that, were well above just what they were learning in the classroom, and some that had just got into the degree. And so they were still like very, very baseline of learning. And then I had some trainers that were bringing stuff to me. They were like, hey, what do you think about this? And we could have conversations about it. And so like, I think part of that is where my love and passion for training trainers and coaching coaches came in, is seeing the development in coming in and just learning these things and starting to connect the dots and starting to apply them. And then whenever I went to Texas, that just emphasized where, to even more of a lesser degree, I was just one-on-one. Here and there I might still have a class or a client, but more of my time and focus went towards the development of these students into, I mean, my goal in the university setting and in my profession has always been that, hey, we get maybe 4 years with them. Like we need to try to give them experiences, need to try to give them tools that they can use outside of this, because they're leaving at some point. Like our focus at the university isn't necessarily longevity in me training trainers. It's what can I give them in the time that I have, that these are tools that they're able to use and continue on. So if they decide to take this as a side job or go into this profession, they've got a leg up on what they're going into. And like I try my best to like give them those experiences and make it relatable and make it an enjoyable experience. But I think really that's where the transition came, is just through the demands and the priorities of the job. I had to make that, and just kept leaning into it and looking at like, how could I expand this outside of just my rec center? And so looking at conferences that I could present at, looking at different workshops I could go to or connect with people. And then along that line, that's kind of where the social media aspect came into play of, okay, like this is a tool that you can use. And like I've developed and created a lot of relationships through it, but I never fell into the trap of like doing things for social media.
Yes. Yeah.
Like even on my page, it has like training logs and dogs, because that's all it is. Like it's just a training log for myself, and like it gives me points and times where I can go back and kind of look at what I was doing along with my training book, but also recognizing that, hey, it's a tool that simply like can connect with people, can reach out. And if it's, for me, luckily it's never become something more than that. I know sometimes people can struggle with it, but I think if we can keep the context of how we're using the medium and not falling into the trap of being used by the medium, it can be very, very beneficial in our space.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that. I think it's kind of like a common uh, thing now to just eschew social media entirely, to be like, yeah, social media like sucks. I'm going to get rid of it. Like it's always poisonous. And I kind of feel the same way about it. It's like, it's a tool. It's mostly just like a training history for me to look back and be like, what was I doing 2 years ago? But I think, yeah, everything has its place, and everything kept within context and used, all tools used appropriately, uh, are to me valuable in keeping around, so long as you don't find them harmful.
Yeah,
Is it?
yeah. As long as you understand and like understand how you're using them and have a purpose behind them. One of one indicator, probably not great, that if you're announcing that you're getting off of social media, you're probably missing the boat. Like just take the step. Like if it's got to that point, just do it. Like
Yeah.
don't announce it. It'll be fine. People will figure it out. Um, but yeah, and it can be a great place to connect. It can be a great place to look what other people are doing and get ideas and get context, get good information and education. But it shouldn't solely be that like that's where the rubber meets the road, that we need to look to apply things and like add our own context to them, and we can learn things without it having to take over the whole of how we train or how we program. Like that's the hardest thing, that
Yeah.
for people to really understand that longevity method, that just kind of jump around or like are overtaken with new information, where it's like, oh, this is new information, I have to redo everything I've been doing and now make this like the standard that I operate through. or that are like, there's good to trying different programs, but there's also like, if you're always just jumping around different programs, then you're never truly like doing a month of a program, a month of a different program. You're never truly seeing the benefits and longevity of that program, because honestly, like you can run anything for a month. Like I don't necessarily advise any of the people that are doing like the squat programs coming up for a month.
Right.
It's But you can do it.
You can survive it. Yeah.
Does that mean that like, should you do it the next month? No. And that's where we can start to like add that layer or lens or context. Like, is the quality of a program is through its longevity, if it has an ability to progress for long term. Because if you have a good program, you shouldn't ever have to go off of it. You have to adapt it, you have to progress it and modify through it. But like, it's all exercise and movement, and done correctly, it can be done for a decade.
Almost infinite. Yeah, and I think it's well, a couple of things. One, I think, like you said, a really high quality program should be almost endless. Like you find the movement patterns that work for you. If problems come up, you address them. If range of motion issues come up, you address them, etc. But I think that the idea of like really choosing something and sticking with it long term, I do see like social media interfere with that, or even just like seeing other people in the gym do stuff, right? It's like you see folks where it's, all of a sudden you're whatever, I don't know, you're doing snatches at a CrossFit gym and you've been doing a warm up for you because it fits in the context of your program. And all of a sudden you see like everybody else in the group starting to do that drill. And you're like, but like, why are you doing the drill? And what are you getting out of the drill? And like, is it doing anything for you? Or are you doing it arbitrarily? Well, it's not arbitrary in mine, but it may be arbitrary in someone else's. And I think the same thing happens with social media, of like seeing novelty and then just completely turning everything over. Um, and I think kind of similar to that, it falls, I think, in line. It's the same crisis of like wanting everything now as overconsumption of information, which is that, it's like, as trainers, we're never finished. And as people who pursue getting stronger or getting, fitter, or whatever kind of athletic training goal it is that we have, we're also like never finished. Like you can train basically forever and you can learn basically forever. And the comfort in that is that like, you don't have to do all of it right now. And if I was given the option between a program that would get me stronger in the next program A gets me stronger in the next 4 months, but by month 6 I'm burnt out, versus program B that gets me stronger for 12 months and beyond, but maybe in the first 4 months I don't have as much to show, then I'd like take program B, right? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think something that Phil talks about with like longevity and programming is if he could, if he had a program that would put um like 50 pounds on your total every year, most people would be like, yeah, that sounds awesome.
Hmm.
Like just continuous for the next 10 years, you'll add 50 pounds. Like sounds fantastic.
Good.
But in application, like people get very, very impatient.
Right.
And like you said, they can fall to novelty and they're again, there's nothing wrong with trying new things and like looking at how we can adapt and adjust things. It's just
Sure.
having that context, having that purpose for it. Like I mentioned before, that's where like I've been able to do just that of start looking and adding exercise in a different way because I've got my 4 days of strength covered. Like now it's just, hey, these go first, these are the priority. Now outside I have a little bit more freedom and in the context of it is like, don't fuck yourself up for the other 4 days.
Right.
Like
Right.
it can be that simple of like, okay, now you have some freedom, but add some context of like why we're doing this. Is there an ability to progress and regress this? If it's an exercise that's at the end where it has you have no way to progress it, like it's going to be very, very hard to try to apply that or try to introduce that to anyone else.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. James, I feel like I could sit here and talk probably pretty endlessly, speaking of things that are endless, but I know that you have some time constrictions, so we are getting close to 8:30 here, and I don't want to retain you longer than you've offered to give us of your time. So I really appreciate your time today. Is there anything in closing that you'd like to share with people, or anything that you're reading or watching or learning from? Of course, prescript. But is there anything else that you feel like the rest of us would benefit from knowing about?
It's a very, very good question. I don't know if I have a
No
good answer
pressure. You're
to.
right.
No pressure at all. I don't know. I guess a leaving message that I would kind of say with it, kind of in context of everything we talked about, is viewing like start looking at exercise as a stressor. And again, it's not meant to be a bad thing. We as humans we thrive on the ability to adapt from stress, but view exercise as a stress, and we need to be mindful of how we're recovering from that stress that anytime we talk about exercise or working out, like it should go one to one with how we're recovering and making sure that like we're putting as much emphasis on our ability to actually recover, and that's physically recover, but also mentally recover, because it'll take a toll on both. And so just making sure that like we're mindful of that and we're associating recovery with exercise. I think that's right now where I'm at. That's the message I can kind of leave on. Falling back into that, like walk when you must, sprint when you can. That on the harder, difficult days, like do what you can. Like something's better than nothing. And on the good days, like we can look at taking it a little bit further and using, that the good momentum that we have and just trying to build upon it because momentum carries across. And so if we can capture that and keep it going, like it's going to pay dividends down the road.
Absolutely. That's, yes, I think that's some great wisdom to leave everyone with. James, if people want to find video of your training log and pictures of your dogs, where can they find you?
Yes. If people want to get in contact with me, can do it through multiple forms. I'm usually pretty good about responding and interacting. So on Instagram, it's Thayer, Thayer 2513. If they specifically want to look for my dogs, it's there's a hashtag Blue Suited Gentleman. Enjoy. Um, let's see, if they want to reach out in my email, it's byproductperformance.com. And then if they want to learn more about any of the great things that Prescript's doing, they can go to the website. We currently have skill acquisition available for registration, but we'll be opening PSL1 again. We have some workshops going on. And then there's also RXD Radio. So that is the podcast that Jordan Shallow, Killian Hamilton, sometimes Jordan Genta are on. That does a great job of kind of featuring different guests. It talks about some fitness, sometimes not fitness, but it's always a good time and a good listen. I guess I should also promote my own podcast that I do. But yes, I also have a podcast. It's called Byproduct Performance Podcast. Typically comes out on Tuesdays. So by all means, if it's messaging me through Instagram, if it's on email, anyway, just reach out. Always happy to have conversations.
Great. Thank you so much, James. And I'll absolutely have to check out your podcast. If we want to find it, where is it hosted?
So it is available now. It's available through Anchor, Spotify, Apple Play. So it should be
pretty much
distributed. Yeah, it should be distributed anywhere that podcasts are available now. And I just want to say, Annalise, that like I really, really appreciate you having me on. Fantastic conversation. I could definitely keep going for a couple hours, but alas, we're limited on time. We'll definitely have to do this again. And like we talked about, I think it's important to have these conversations, especially for us. We're in Kansas. It's a middle state and kind of looked over. It's looked over quite a bit, and I think that's why it's so important for people in our profession to be able to connect and be able to communicate, because it's few and far between that we have this connectability. And in a state such as this, like whenever we can identify people that like are like great thinkers, that they're applying this information, that they're continuing to strive to progress themselves and get the most benefits for their clients, like those are people we need to be around. Those are communities we need to build and conversations we need to have.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. And yeah, I fully agree. I think we've got to put Kansas on the map for strength coaching, and we're on our way. So thank you so much, James. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and yeah, we'll chat soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for having me on. It was a pleasure.